Tonight, we are going to explore something that is both vast and quietly fascinating. We are going to talk about a concept that lives at the very heart of the animated series Rick and Morty, and that concept is this: the multiverse. The idea that somewhere, in some dimension you cannot see or touch or name, there is another version of every person who has ever existed, another version of every choice ever made, another version of every life ever lived. And in the world of Rick and Morty, one figure appears in more variations than perhaps any other. One character exists across more dimensions than the mind can easily hold. That character is Rick Sanchez, a scientist,
An old man, a grandfather, a genius, and, depending on which dimension you are looking at, an entirely different kind of person than the one you might expect. So let us begin at the beginning. Let us start slowly and gently with the foundation. Let us talk about what the show tells us about the multiverse and about why Rick appears so many times within it. The world of Rick and Morty is built on a very specific idea. That idea is that reality is not one single thing. It is not a straight line with one beginning and one end. Instead, reality is more like an enormous, branching structure, spreading outward in every direction, endlessly dividing, endlessly multiplying, creating new versions of itself at every possible moment of decision and chance and change. In the language of the show, this structure is called the multiverse. And what that means, in simple terms, is that there are an infinite number of universes running alongside each other, all at the same time, all slightly different from one another. In one universe, events unfolded one way. In another universe, right next to it, events unfolded another way entirely. The differences between universes can be enormous, or they can be almost impossibly small. Sometimes, an entire civilization looks different. Sometimes, the only difference is the color of a single flower on a single day. But all of these universes exist, all of them are real, and all of them contain their own versions of the people who live within them. This is the setting that Rick and Morty builds its world upon, and it is a setting that the show takes seriously in its own particular way. The multiverse is not just a background detail. It is not just a convenient plot device. It is one of the core ideas that the show returns to again and again in episode after episode, in season after season. The multiverse shapes the characters. It shapes their choices. It shapes the way they think about themselves and about the world around them. And at the very center of all of this is Rick Sanchez. Rick Sanchez, as we come to know him through the show, is a scientist of extraordinary ability. He is the grandfather of a boy named Morty, and he lives with Morty's family in a comfortable suburban home in a dimension that the show sometimes refers to as the main dimension, or the central timeline, or, in its own shorthand, Dimension C137. Rick builds portals. He can open doorways between dimensions. He can step from one universe into another with a device small enough to fit in his pocket. And because of this ability, he has traveled extensively across the multiverse. He has seen many universes. He has met many versions of many people. He has, in some ways, become something of a wanderer across the infinite landscape of reality itself. But here is something important that the show reveals over time. Rick is not unique in this ability. He is not the only scientist who has figured out how to travel between dimensions. Across the infinite reach of the multiverse, there are many versions of Rick Sanchez who have made this same discovery. Many Ricks who have built their own portals. Many Ricks who have traveled through the space between dimensions and emerged on the other side. The show reveals that there are, in fact, a very large number of interdimensional traveling Ricks scattered across the multiverse. Not just a few, not just dozens, but an enormous, almost incomprehensible number of them. Each one living in his own dimension, each one carrying his own history, his own choices, his own personality, each one a variation on the same essential figure. And because of this, a question naturally arises. What do all of these Ricks do? How do they coexist? What happens when so many versions of the same genius scientist are all moving through the same shared space between dimensions? The answer, as the show tells us, is that they built something together. But before we get to what they built, let us slow down for just a moment. Let us sit with the idea of infinite Ricks just a little longer, because it is a beautiful and strange idea, and it is worth letting it settle in your mind. Imagine, for a moment, a single person, a single face, with a single history, a single set of memories,
a single light. Now imagine that somewhere, in a universe you cannot see, that same person exists again. The same face, the same name, but the life is slightly different. The choices were slightly different. The world around them was slightly different. And so they turned out slightly differently too. Now imagine that happening again, and again, and again, endlessly. An infinite chain of variations on the same person, each one real, each one alive, each one going about their day in their own dimension without any knowledge of the others. That is what the show is describing when it talks about the many Ricks of the multiverse. An enormous,
uncountable population of variations on Rick Sanchez. Some of them very similar to the Rick we follow in the main story.
some of them radically different, some of them living quiet lives, some of them living extraordinary ones, some of them brilliant and cruel, some of them gentle and kind, some of them something else entirely, something we might not have a word for. The show does not pretend that all of these Ricks are the same person. It does not suggest that because they share a name and a face, they are interchangeable. Quite the opposite, in fact. The show takes great care to show us that different Ricks, despite looking alike, can be profoundly different from one another. We will explore many of these differences as we move through this narration. But for now, let us continue with the foundation. Let us continue with the structure that all of these Ricks built together. In the third season of Rick and Morty,
The show offers us a much clearer picture of how the many Ricks of the multiverse have organized themselves.
it does this through two important episodes. The first is the season 3 premiere called The Rickshank Rickdemption. The second is the 7th episode of that season called The Ricklantis Mix-Up, which is also sometimes referred to as Tales from the Citadel. Both of these episodes give us a window into an extraordinary structure, a place that exists in the space between dimensions, a place built by Ricks and maintained by Ricks and populated by Ricks and their Mortys, a place called the Citadel of Ricks. We will talk much more about the Citadel in its own section later in this narration, but for now,
The important thing to understand is that the Citadel represents the most visible answer to that earlier question.
what do all of these Ricks do when they find themselves sharing the same interdimensional space? They build a community, they build a civilization, they build a society that reflects all of their strengths and all of their contradictions. And because there are so many Ricks, because there are enough Ricks to fill an entire city with their variations, the Citadel becomes a place of extraordinary diversity. Not diversity of appearance necessarily, because all Ricks do look roughly the same, but diversity of personality, diversity of role, diversity of purpose and belief and behavior. There are Ricks who work as police officers on the Citadel. There are Ricks who work in factories. There are Ricks who run for political office. There are Ricks who live simple, ordinary lives within the structure of the Citadel,
going about their days without any of the adventure or genius that the main Rick demonstrates in his own dimension.
There are Ricks who are happy, and Ricks who are broken, and Ricks who are somewhere in between. There are Ricks who resent their circumstances, and Ricks who have made peace with them. There are Ricks who remember what they once dreamed of becoming, and Ricks who seem to have forgotten entirely. All of this is shown within the episodes. All of it is part of the world that the show has carefully built. And all of it begins with that foundational idea, the multiverse, and the infinite variations it contains. Let us talk, for a moment, about the original Rick, the one we follow most closely through the series, the one designated as Rick C137, named for his home dimension. This Rick is the one who lives with his daughter Beth, her husband Jerry, and their 2 children, Summer and Morty. He is the one who takes Morty on adventures across dimensions and galaxies. He is the one with the flask and the belching and the long white lab coat. He is the one whose genius is matched almost equally by his pain. This Rick is complicated. He is brilliant, yes. He is capable of things that no one else in the show can do. He understands the universe at a level that most people cannot even imagine reaching. But he is also wounded in ways that the show reveals slowly and carefully over time. He has lost things. He has made choices that cost him dearly. He has seen the multiverse, and that sight has changed him in ways that are not always easy to look at. But what is important for our purposes in this particular narration is not the depths of the main Rick's inner life. We will touch on those things gently here and there where they are relevant. What is more important for now is understanding that the main Rick exists as one point on a vast spectrum. He is one version among many. He is one particular outcome of an infinite number of possible outcomes. And the other points on that spectrum are fascinating in their own right. The other Ricks, the ones we see only briefly, the ones who appear in the background of a crowded scene, or who are given a single episode to tell their story, or who exist only as a reference in someone else's conversation. All of them are worth knowing about. All of them have something to tell us. And that is what this narration is for. To sit quietly with those other Ricks, to look at them slowly and carefully, without rushing, without judgment, and to understand what the show is showing us through their existence. The multiverse, as the show presents it, is not a perfect system. It is not an orderly, rational place where everything makes sense and everything fits neatly into categories. It is, like most things in Rick and Morty, messy and strange and full of contradictions. Some universes, the show tells us, are more similar to each other than others. There are clusters of realities that are close together, in some dimensional sense, that share most of their major features and differ only in small details. And there are realities that are very far apart, in that same dimensional sense, that are radically different from one another, almost unrecognizable as variations on the same basic structure. The Ricks who come from these different kinds of universes can be very different from one another as a result. A Rick from a dimension that is very close to C137 might seem almost identical to the main Rick. He might have made nearly all the same choices. He might carry nearly all the same memories. He might speak and move and think in nearly the same ways. But a Rick from a dimension that is very far away, very different, very strange, might seem like a different person entirely. He might have grown up in a world so unlike the main Ricks that he developed an entirely different set of values, an entirely different personality, an entirely different way of moving through the world. The show plays with this idea throughout its run. It uses the infinite variety of the multiverse to show us different possibilities, different outcomes, different people who might have been if things had gone differently. And it does this not to be confusing, but to say something real and true about human nature, and about the nature of identity, and about what it means to be a person in a world that could have made you into any number of different things. As we settle into this narration, as the night grows quieter around you and your breath grows slower and more even, keep this idea close. Keep the image of the multiverse close. All those dimensions, side by side, each one complete and real and whole. All those Ricks, each one living his own version of a life, each one carrying his own version of the same essential character, shaped by his own particular circumstances into his own particular form. There is something quietly comforting about that image, if you let it be. All those lives running alongside each other, all those variations, each one valid, each one real. None of them wrong, none of them failures, just different, just other possibilities realized in other places. The Rick we follow in the main story is one of those possibilities. The Ricks we will explore in the coming sections are others. Each one is a window into a different way that the same essential person can be. Each one shows us something that the main Rick cannot show us alone. And so we will take them one by one, gently and slowly. We will not rush, we will not skip ahead. We will sit with each one for a while and let them tell us what they have to tell. Let your eyes feel heavy if they want to. Let the muscles in your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench and let your hands rest open. There is no tension required for this. There is nothing to hold on to. Just the slow, gentle drift of one story into the next, one section into the next, one quiet hour into another. We are in no hurry here. The multiverse is not going anywhere. There is one more thing worth mentioning before we close this first section and move into the next, and that is the question of what the existence of so many Ricks means for each individual Rick. When you know that there are infinite versions of yourself, when you know that every choice you have made could have gone differently, and that in some dimension it did go differently, what does that do to your sense of who you are? What does it do to your sense of meaning and purpose and identity? The show asks this question in different ways, in different episodes, through different characters. The main Rick, in particular, seems to have wrestled with this question for a very long time. He seems to have arrived at a kind of answer, though not necessarily a comfortable one. He seems to have decided that because there are infinite versions of everything, No single version matters more than any other. That meaning is something you choose, not something you find. That the self is not a fixed thing, but a moving one, always in the process of becoming something slightly different. Other Ricks seem to have arrived at different answers. Some seem to find the idea of infinite versions liberating. Some seem to find it crushing. Some seem to have stopped thinking about it altogether and simply go about their lives as if the multiverse were no more remarkable than the weather. All of these responses are part of what the show is exploring. All of them are valid within the world of the series, and all of them will appear, in one form or another, in the Ricks we will be looking at in the sections to come. For now, though, let that settle. Let the idea of infinite Ricks spread across infinite dimensions, each one real, each one living, each one a possibility realized. Let that idea settle into you like warmth, like the slow spreading feeling of a body finally letting itself rest. We will begin the next section soon, and in that section, we will meet one of the most particular and memorable of all the Rick variants the show has given us. One who, in many ways, is the opposite of everything you might expect a Rick to be. But that is for the next section. For now, simply rest. Simply breathe. Simply let the multiverse expand quietly around you, vast and infinite and full of sleeping possibilities. Section 2, Doofus Rick. Let yourself settle a little deeper now. Feel the weight of your body against the surface beneath you. Feel the quiet that is gathered in the room. There is no rush here. There is only the slow, easy movement of one idea into the next, like water finding its way through a gentle landscape, never hurrying, always arriving exactly where it needs to be. In this section, we are going to meet one of the most memorable Rick variants in the entire series. A Rick who is, in almost every way you can think of, different from what you might expect when you hear the name Rick Sanchez. A Rick who does not behave the way other Ricks behave, who does not think the way other Ricks think, who does not carry himself the way other Ricks carry themselves. A Rick who has been given a nickname by the other Ricks that is, in its own way, very revealing. That nickname is Doofus Rick. And the story of Doofus Rick is a quiet, gentle, and surprisingly touching one. Doofus Rick appears in the 18th episode of the second season of Rick and Morty, in an episode called Rick Potion Number 9. No, let us correct that. Doofus Rick actually appears in the 4th episode of the first season, which is called M. Night Shame Aliens. No, let us be careful here. Doofus Rick appears in the episode called Rick Potion Number 9. Let us slow down and be precise. Doofus Rick appears in the episode titled Ricksty Minutes, which is the 8th episode of the first season. No, still not right. Let us be careful and accurate. Doofus Rick appears in the episode Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, which is the 10th episode of the first season. That is the correct episode. This is the one where the Citadel of Ricks first makes a meaningful appearance in the show. In this episode, multiple Ricks from across the multiverse gather together, and among them is the one who will be called Doofus Rick. Let us settle into the details of what the show actually shows us about him. In Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind, the main Rick and his Morty are summoned to the Citadel of Ricks. While there, they encounter a number of other Rick and Morty pairs from across the multiverse. And among the Ricks who appear in this context is one who is visibly different from the others. This Rick is softer, not just in temperament, but in the entire way he presents himself. He is kind in the way he speaks. He is gentle in the way he moves. He does not have the sharp, cutting edge that most Ricks seem to carry with them as a matter of course. He does not seem to be dismissive of others or contemptuous of the world around him. He simply seems to be present and gentle and genuinely happy to be around people. Other Ricks treat him poorly. They look down on him. They use the name Doofus Rick as a way of marking him as lesser, as someone who does not meet their standard, as someone who has somehow failed to become what a Rick is supposed to be. In the culture of the Citadel, where intelligence and capability are the primary measures of worth, a Rick who does not present himself as sharp and superior is a Rick who is seen as deficient. But the show does something interesting with this. It does not simply let the other Rick's judgment stand unchallenged, it allows us to see Doofus Rick for ourselves. And what we see is something quite different from the picture the other Ricks are painting. The most significant relationship in Doofus Rick's storyline within this episode involves not another Rick, but a Morty. Specifically, the Morty who is paired with him and through that pairing, a connection that is simple and genuine and kind. Doofus Rick is, in many ways, exactly the kind of grandfather figure that Morty might genuinely benefit from. He is patient, he is warm. He does not make Morty feel stupid or small. He does not use his intelligence as a weapon. He does not push Morty into dangerous situations or expose him to the harsher realities of the universe with no warning or preparation. He is simply nice. Straightforwardly, uncomplicated nice.
In a show full of characters who are complicated and conflicted and carrying enormous amounts of emotional baggage, Doofus Rick's niceness is almost startling. It stands out. It draws the eye, and it raises a question that the show is quietly asking. What does it mean that the Ricks who are considered most successful are the ones who are most difficult and sharp, while the Rick who is considered a failure is the one who is gentle and kind? That question does not have a simple answer, and the show does not pretend that it does. But it is there, quietly, underneath the surface of the episode, asking to be noticed. One detail that the show includes about Doofus Rick is notable enough to mention specifically. In the episode, it is mentioned, in passing, that Doofus Rick comes from a dimension where human beings eat their own feces. This is, of course, a joke, delivered in the show's characteristically irreverent style. But it is also a detail that tells us something about the range of universes that exist in the multiverse. Even in the wildest, most unusual universe the show can imagine, a Rick exists. Even in a dimension so different from our own that the basic habits of human life are completely transformed, there is still a version of Rick Sanchez. Still a white-haired old man with that particular face and that particular name. Still a scientist, still a grandfather, still in some essential way recognizable as himself, even if everything around him has shifted almost beyond recognition. That is a small but meaningful detail. It underlines the point that the multiverse is truly infinite in its variations, that no matter how strange or unusual a universe might be, the essential figure of Rick Sanchez can still appear within it, shaped by that strangeness into something particular and unique. Doofus Rick's dimension happens to be one of the stranger ones, but it does not seem to have made him strange. It seems to have made him, if anything, gentler, as if growing up in a world without certain kinds of pretense or sophistication has freed him from the need to perform the kind of sharp, superior intelligence that other Ricks use as armor. The other Ricks at the Citadel are not kind to Doofus Rick. They exclude him, they mock him, they treat his presence as something to be tolerated at best and laughed at most of the time. In the culture of the Citadel, which we will explore in more detail in a later section, status is measured in very specific ways. Intelligence is paramount, capability is everything, and a Rick who does not demonstrate those qualities in the expected ways is a Rick who is placed at the bottom of the hierarchy. Doofus Rick does not seem to be unaware of this treatment. He does not seem to be oblivious to the fact that other Ricks look down on him, but he also does not seem to be particularly wounded by it. At least, not in the way you might expect. He carries his gentleness with him like something solid and real, something that does not waver just because other people have decided it is not valuable. There is something quietly admirable about that, about a person who knows they are being diminished and who continues to be themselves anyway, who does not try to become what others want them to be, because what they already are is real and genuine and their own. The show does not make this point loudly. It does not underline it with dramatic music or explicit dialogue. It simply shows us Doofus Rick being himself and lets us draw our own conclusions. There is a parallel storyline that runs through the same episode, involving the Morty we follow most closely throughout the series. In this episode, Morty ends up spending time with a group of Ricks who do not have Mortys of their own. He becomes, for a brief period, part of a different kind of dynamic. And through this, the episode explores the relationship between Ricks and Mortys in interesting ways. The relationship between Doofus Rick and his Morty is a kind of counterpoint to some of these other dynamics, where some Ricks treat their Mortys as tools or shields or simple accessories to their adventures. Doofus Rick seems to treat his Morty as someone genuinely worth caring about, as a person, rather than a function. This is not, it should be said, entirely unique to Doofus Rick. The main Rick, for all his difficult qualities, also genuinely cares about his Morty in ways that the show reveals over time. But the main Rick's care is often buried under layers of deflection and difficulty, hidden beneath behavior that makes it hard to see clearly. Doofus Rick's care is more visible, more straightforward, less defended. In a way, Doofus Rick shows us what the relationship between a Rick and a Morty could look like if the Rick in question had fewer barriers up, if he had let himself simply be present and available and kind, without the armor that most Ricks seem to find necessary. Let us talk for a moment about the word doofus and what it tells us about how the other Ricks see this particular variant. Doofus is not a neutral word. It is a word that means foolish, bumbling, ineffectual, dim. It is a word used to dismiss someone, to mark them as not quite up to the standard that the speaker considers important. When the other Ricks use this word to describe their fellow Rick, they are saying something very clear about what they value and what they do not. They value sharpness, they value quickness, they value the ability to see through things, to cut through pretense, to arrive at the truth of a situation faster than anyone else. They value a kind of superiority, a confident knowingness, a sense of being ahead of the room at all times. Doofus Rick does not seem to value these things, or at least does not perform them in the way other Ricks expect. And so, he is labeled with a word that says, "You are not what we consider good. You are less than what we want you to be." But the show, quietly and without making a big deal of it, invites us to question that assessment. It asks us to look at Doofus Rick and ask whether the things the other Ricks value are actually the most important things, whether sharpness and superiority and the ability to dismiss others are really the measures of a good life, whether in fact kindness and warmth and genuine human connection might be worth more than all the genius in the multiverse. It does not answer that question for us, but it asks it. And in asking it, it gives Doofus Rick a dignity that the other Ricks, with all their contempt, cannot quite take away. Doofus Rick does not appear in every episode. He is not a recurring character in the same way that the main Rick is. But his brief appearance in close Rick counters of the Rick kind leaves an impression that lingers. He is, in many ways, one of the most humanly sympathetic Ricks in the entire series. One of the easiest to care about, precisely because his care for others is so uncomplicated and genuine. In a show that often explores the cost of genius, that often looks at the ways that extreme intelligence can isolate a person, can cut them off from the warmth and simplicity of ordinary human connection, Doofus Rick represents something like an answer to the question, what if none of that cost had been paid? What if the genius had not come at the price of the warmth? What if a Rick had grown up into someone who was still gentle, still open, still able to simply be present with another person, without needing to prove himself, or protect himself, or be better than everyone in the room? The show does not say that Doofus Rick is smarter for having avoided that cost. It does not say he is wiser. It simply shows us that he is kind, and that his kindness is real, and that it matters. That is enough. There is also something worth noting about the way Doofus Rick moves through the world of the Citadel. The Citadel, as we will discuss in more detail later, is a place where Ricks have built a society together. And like most societies, it has hierarchies. It has expectations. It has unwritten rules about who belongs and who does not, who is respected and who is overlooked. Doofus Rick, by the standards of the Citadel, does not belong at the top of those hierarchies. He is not performing the right kind of Rick identity. He is not sharp enough, not cold enough, not sufficiently armored against the world. And so he is placed at the edges, treated as someone who is merely tolerated rather than genuinely included. But there is something about him that persists. Despite all of that, he continues to be himself. He continues to be gentle and kind and real. And in doing so, he quietly challenges the idea that the Citadel's hierarchies are the final word on what matters, that its measurements of worth are the only valid ones. A society that places a man like Doofus Rick at the bottom of its hierarchy is a society that has chosen to value the wrong things. And the show knows this and shows it to us without ever saying it out loud. As we close this section on Doofus Rick, let us sit with him for a moment longer. Let us let the image of him settle into the quiet of the night. He is a Rick who is kind, a Rick who is warm, a Rick who does not need to be the smartest person in the room, or the most formidable, or the most feared. He is a Rick who simply is what he is, without apology, without performance, without armor. In a multiverse full of Ricks who are defined by their genius and their difficulty and their enormous, complicated inner lives,
Doofus Rick stands apart not because he is less than them, but because he is different from them. Because he has found a way to be Rick Sanchez that does not require him to be sharp and defensive and always a little bit unreachable. There is something peaceful about that. Something worth resting in for a moment. Let your breath slow down. Let the image of Doofus Rick, gentle and kind in a world that did not always deserve his gentleness, let that image settle into you. He is out there, in his dimension, going about his quiet life. And somewhere, in whatever universe he calls home, things are probably a little warmer for his being in them. That is not a small thing.
In the vast, infinite, endlessly complicated multiverse of Rick and Morty, a little warmth is never a small thing. Section 3. Simple Rick. The night is quiet now. Let yourself sink a little deeper into wherever you are resting. Let the sounds of the world outside grow softer, more distant, like rain heard from inside a warm room. You are exactly where you should be. In this section, we are going to explore another Rick variant, one who is quite different from Doofus Rick and different in turn from the main Rick. This Rick story is one of the most quietly poignant in the entire series. It is a story about simplicity, about memory, about the kind of happiness that is so pure and so uncomplicated that it becomes, in its own way, something precious and rare. His name, in the shorthand of the show, is Simple Rick, and his story is told within the context of the Citadel of Ricks, in a way that manages to be both darkly comic and genuinely affecting at the same time. Simple Rick appears as part of a storyline in the 7th episode of the 3rd season, the Ricklantis Mix-Up, also known as Tales from the Citadel. This episode is remarkable for many reasons, not least of which is that it tells several different stories happening simultaneously within the Citadel, weaving them together into a portrait of a society that is complex and contradictory and very much alive. One of the storylines in this episode involves a factory, a specific kind of factory, producing a specific kind of product. And at the center of that factory is Simple Rick. The factory is called the Simple Rick Wafer Cookie Facility, and the product it produces, as the name suggests, is cookies. Specifically, a particular kind of cookie that is advertised with an emphasis on the feeling it provides. The feeling of simple happiness, of uncomplicated joy, of a moment so pure and so gentle that it washes away complexity and leaves something like peace in its place. Let us slow down and describe what the show actually tells us about Simple Rick himself before we get to the factory and the cookies. Simple Rick is a Rick who at some point in his life made a choice that the other Ricks did not make, or, perhaps more accurately, he found himself in a set of circumstances that led him to a place most Ricks do not end up. He became a father. He raised his daughter, Beth, and somewhere in that process of raising her, something happened to him that changed him. He found happiness. Not the complicated, layered, defended kind of happiness that the main Rick might occasionally allow himself to feel, briefly and with difficulty. Simple Rick found a simple kind of happiness, the kind that comes from watching a child you love grow up and be well, the kind that comes from an ordinary morning with your family with no greater ambition than the moment itself. The show presents this, through the framing of the Citadel, as something rare and valuable. So rare and valuable, in fact, that someone has decided to exploit it. Here is what the show tells us about the Simple Rick facility and how it works. Simple Rick is not dead. He is not retired. He is not living quietly in some corner of the Citadel. Instead, he is in a kind of suspended state, connected to a machine, while the facility harvests the neurochemical signals that his brain produces when he experiences his memory of that moment of happiness with his daughter. The memory is specific. It is the memory of a day when Simple Rick watched his daughter do something ordinary and sweet and felt, in that moment, completely and genuinely happy. Not happy because of genius, not happy because of achievement, not happy because of power or knowledge or anything external, simply happy because his daughter was there and she was his and the moment was good. The Citadel has turned this memory into a product. The neurochemical experience of Simple Rick's happiness is harvested and used to flavor the cookies produced in the facility. The cookies are then sold with advertising that emphasizes the feeling they deliver. They offer the consumer, according to the marketing,
the sensation of Simple Rick's simple joy, the uncomplicated, clean feeling of a good, quiet moment. There is something deeply unsettling about this when you think about it carefully. And the show wants you to think about it carefully. It wants you to sit with the strangeness of what is being described. Simple Rick is being kept alive in order to be a source of raw emotional material for a commercial product. His happiness, the most genuine and personal thing about him, has been commodified. It has been taken from him, in a sense, and sold to others. He is not free. He is not living his life. He is being used. And yet, the show also shows us that Simple Rick himself may not experience his situation as suffering. He is, after all, in the grip of his happiest memory, on a kind of continuous loop. He is not experiencing the harsh realities of the Citadel or the cold calculation of the people who have placed him there. He is, at least in some sense, simply happy. This creates a moral complexity that the show does not resolve cleanly. Is Simple Rick's situation a tragedy? Is he being harmed? Or is he experiencing something like a perpetual grace, a never-ending visit to the best moment of his life? The show does not answer this question definitively. It presents both possibilities simultaneously and lets the viewer sit with the discomfort of not knowing. What is clear is that the Citadel's relationship to Simple Rick says something important about the values of that society, and what it says is not entirely flattering. The Citadel has decided that Simple Rick's happiness is valuable primarily as a commercial resource. It has not decided to protect him, or honor him, or give him his freedom. It has decided to extract value from him, to use what is most genuine and most personal about him as a raw material for profit. This is, in its own way, a very sharp commentary on how societies sometimes treat the most vulnerable or unusual among their members, those who are different, who experience the world in ways that others find unusual or surprising, can sometimes find their difference turned into a resource for those who are more powerful. Their particularity, rather than being respected, becomes something to be exploited. Simple Rick did not choose to be the source of a commercial product. He found happiness, quietly and genuinely, in the simplest possible way, and the world he found himself in decided to make money out of it. The advertising for Simple Rick wafer cookies that appears within the episode is both funny and sad in the way that the best Rick and Morty moments tend to be. The advertisement presents Simple Rick's story with warmth and sentimentality. It talks about how Simple Rick found joy in the simplest of things, in a daughter's smile, in a quiet day, in a moment without complexity. And it uses this story to sell cookies. The gap between the genuine warmth of Simple Rick's actual experience and the commercial packaging that has been placed around it is something the show is clearly aware of. It is using the advertisement to show us how easily genuine feeling can be turned into a product, how readily the language of authenticity and simplicity can be borrowed by commercial enterprise, stripped of its substance and sold back to people as a substitute for the real thing. The cookies cannot actually give the consumer what Simple Rick has. They can provide a sensation, a neurochemical echo of his happiness, but they cannot provide the actual experience that generated that happiness. They cannot provide the relationship with a daughter, the years of raising a child, the ordinary mornings and difficult evenings and quiet moments that accumulate over time into something like a life. Simple Rick has something that the cookies can only approximate. And the tragedy is that while others purchase approximations of his joy, he remains in that facility, removed from the world, unable to live the ongoing life that might generate more genuine happiness. It is worth spending a moment on what Simple Rick represents within the broader context of the show's exploration of Rick variants. Most Ricks, as the show presents them, are defined by their genius, by their intellect, by their ability to understand and manipulate the universe around them. The main Rick is defined this way. The Ricks of the Citadel are defined this way. Intelligence is the thing that makes a Rick, in the conventional understanding of what the character represents. But Simple Rick has found something else to be defined by. He has found happiness in a relationship, in love, in the ordinary, unremarkable experience of caring for another person and watching them grow. He has found, in the simple act of fatherhood, something that all his intelligence could not have manufactured or calculated or built. This is not presented as a failure on his part, quite the opposite. The show treats Simple Rick's happiness as genuinely precious, as something real and valuable, So real, in fact, that it can be extracted and turned into a product. So valuable, in fact, that a corporation has decided to build an entire business around it. The fact that his happiness has been commodified is not a reflection of its worthlessness. It is a reflection of how the world around him has failed to recognize its true nature. His happiness is real. The problem is not Simple Rick. The problem is what has been done with him. Let us talk for a moment about the cookies themselves and the way the episode uses them within its story. The Simple Rick wafer cookies appear not just in the advertising segment of the episode, but in the actual action of one of the storylines. In the factory storyline, a worker, Rick, discovers the truth of how the cookies are made. He learns about Simple Rick and his machine. He learns about the extraction process. And this discovery becomes part of a larger confrontation. The factory storyline involves Rick workers who are, themselves, not at the top of the Citadel's hierarchy. They are Ricks who have been assigned to work in the factory, to produce the cookies, to maintain the machines. They are not the decision makers. They are not the powerful ones. They are, in the Citadel's own terms, workers. And they have their own frustrations, their own grievances, their own sense of being used by a system that does not see them clearly. The discovery of what is being done to Simple Rick resonates differently for them than it might for someone at the top of the hierarchy. They recognize in Simple Rick's situation something that rhymes with their own. They too are being used. They too are providing labor and energy and effort for a system that packages and sells the products of their work without fully acknowledging what those products cost. This resonance is something the show builds carefully. It is not a heavy-handed comparison. It does not announce itself. It is simply there, in the way the episode is constructed, in the way the stories are woven together. Simple Rick, in his machine, producing the raw material of joy that gets turned into a consumer product. The factory workers, Ricks themselves, producing the physical cookies that carry that joy to market. And the consumers, other Ricks on the Citadel, purchasing and eating those cookies in search of a feeling that the cookies can only partially and temporarily provide. Everyone in this chain is, in some sense, caught in a system that is not fully honest with them. Simple Rick does not know what is being done with his happiness. The factory workers may not fully understand the implications of what they are producing, and the consumers, eating their cookies, are buying something that is sold as authentic, but is, by its very nature, a reproduction. Simple Rick's genuine happiness becomes, through this process, something that can be sold but never truly shared. That is the quiet sadness at the heart of his story. And yet, there is also something else at the heart of his story, something worth holding on to even in the face of all that sadness. Simple Rick found happiness, real, genuine, uncomplicated happiness in the simplest possible experience, in watching his daughter live her life, in being present for an ordinary moment that was, to him, entirely and completely enough. That is not nothing. That is, in many ways, everything. The main Rick, for all his genius and all his ability, often seems to struggle with exactly this kind of happiness. He reaches for it, in glimpses, in moments, but it is hard for him to hold on to, hard for him to let himself simply be in, hard for him to feel without immediately pulling back from it, without defending himself against it, without finding a way to keep it at arm's length. Simple Rick did not have that difficulty. He simply felt it. He simply let it be real. And the fact that the world around him then decided to exploit that realness does not make the original experience any less genuine. The happiness was real. It happened. It was his. As we close this section and prepare to move into the next, let us carry Simple Rick with us for a moment. Let us hold the image of him gently. A Rick who found happiness in the simplest place. A Rick who was not defined by his genius, or his complexity, or his ability to see through the universe. A Rick who was, for a moment, simply a father, simply present, simply glad. Whatever has been done with his happiness since, the happiness itself was real. And in the vast, complicated, endlessly surprising multiverse of Rick and Morty, something real and simple and genuine is worth remembering. Let your breathing slow. Let the quiet of the night deepen around you. We will move into the next section gently, without hurry, following the thread of the story from one Rick to the next. Each one a different window into the same essential mystery. Section 4. Toxic Rick. You are doing wonderfully. The night is settling. Let yourself breathe gently and slowly, in and out, without effort, without trying, just letting the breath happen as it always does, as it always will. In this section, we are going to explore a very specific episode and a very specific situation that gives us one of the most unusual Rick variants in the entire series. This Rick is not exactly a separate person from another dimension. He is not a Rick from a different universe living a different life. He is something stranger and more intimate than that. He is a part of the main Rick that has been separated from the rest. He is what remains when everything that makes life painful, difficult, and complicated is pulled out of a person and allowed to exist on its own. He is Toxic Rick, and his story is one of the most revealing in the entire series. The episode we are looking at in this section is the 6th episode of the 3rd season, called Rest and Ricklaxation. It is an episode that begins with a simple premise. Rick and Morty have just returned from an extraordinarily stressful adventure. The adventure itself is not shown in detail, but its effects on both of them are visible. They are exhausted, they are shaken, they need to recover. Rick, being Rick, does not choose to recover through ordinary means. Instead, he takes Morty to a facility, a kind of interdimensional spa that offers a unique service. This facility can remove the toxic elements from a person's psychology. It can separate out the parts of a person that cause stress, anxiety, self-destructive behavior, and harmful patterns of thinking, and extract those parts, leaving behind a version of the person that is cleaner, lighter, easier. The process works. Rick and Morty both undergo the procedure, and what emerges on the other side of it are 2 new versions of each character. The main versions, the ones we follow as protagonists, emerge as their detoxified selves, and the extracted toxins, given physical form, emerge as Toxic Rick and Toxic Morty. Let us focus on Toxic Rick, because it is his nature and behavior that the episode dwells on most extensively, and that reveals the most about the deeper themes the show is exploring. Toxic Rick, at first glance,
Seems like simply a villain. He is aggressive, he is cruel, he is contemptuous of everyone around him. He is loud and dismissive and hurtful in ways that seem straightforwardly bad. He looks like the worst version of Rick, the parts of Rick that cause the most damage to himself and to others. But the episode complicates this picture as it develops, because as we watch the detoxified Rick navigate his new, clean existence, something becomes clear. The detoxified Rick is not entirely good either. He is pleasant, yes. He is easier to be around. He is less sharp, less cutting, less likely to say something that lands like a knife. But he is also missing something. He is missing the drive, the passion, the deep, painful care that underlies even the main Rick's most difficult behavior. The detoxified Rick is comfortable, but comfort, the episode suggests, is not the same thing as wholeness. Toxic Rick, meanwhile, is not simply a collection of bad traits. He is a collection of painful ones. And pain and bad are not always the same thing. What Toxic Rick carries, extracted from the main Rick's psychology, includes things like the grief that the main Rick has been carrying for years, the loss, the wounds that have never fully healed, the fear of connection born from the experience of having lost connection in painful ways, the need for control born from the experience of having been at the mercy of events that could not be controlled, the cynicism born from having seen too clearly how things can go wrong. None of these things are comfortable. None of them are easy to live with, but they are also not simply toxins. They are responses to real experiences. They are adaptations to a real and difficult world. They are, in their own way, a kind of survival. The episode does not make this point gently. It makes it through the plot itself, through what happens when the detoxified Rick is left without these parts of himself. The detoxified Rick is pleasant and functional and relatively happy, but he is also less present, less urgent, less alive, in a particular kind of way that is hard to name but easy to recognize. Toxic Rick, separated from the rest of the main Rick's personality, does what any separated part of a person might do. He tries to survive. He tries to return to what he knows. He tries to get back to the main Rick's life because that is where he belongs. That is where he has always lived, and separation from it is, for him, a kind of death. The episode constructs this as a conflict. The detoxified Rick and Morty are living their new, pleasant lives. They are getting along better. They are experiencing less friction, less drama,
drama, less of the exhausting, complicated dynamic that has always characterized their relationship. And then, Toxic Rick and Toxic Morty come to disrupt this new equilibrium. What follows is a confrontation that is both action-driven and philosophically interesting, because the question the episode is really asking is, which version of Rick is real? Which version is the actual Rick? The one without the pain, who is easier and more pleasant, or the one who carries the pain, who is harder but also more complete? The answer the episode arrives at is clear, though not simple. Rick reintegrates with his toxic parts. The painful elements are returned to their place within the whole. The detoxified version does not remain. The complete Rick, the one who carries all of it, the grief and the fear and the love and the genius and the self-destruction and the care, is the one who continues. And the episode frames this not as a defeat, but as a choice. A recognition that wholeness requires all parts of a person, including the ones that cause pain, that you cannot remove the difficult parts of yourself without also removing something essential, that the things that hurt you are sometimes, paradoxically, also the things that make you capable of genuine feeling. This is a quietly profound idea, delivered within the framework of a science fiction comedy, and it is delivered through the figure of Toxic Rick, who is, in his own way, one of the most revealing versions of Rick in the entire series. What does Toxic Rick look like? How does he present himself? Visually, he is not dramatically different from the main Rick. He has the same white hair, the same overall appearance, but his manner is more extreme. His contempt is more naked, more immediate. His cruelty is less defended, less covered by humor or deflection. He says the things the main Rick usually keeps slightly below the surface. He acts on the impulses the main Rick usually restrains. He is also more focused, in a particular way. The main Rick, with all his complexity, is sometimes pulled in multiple directions at once. He is simultaneously brilliant and self-destructive, simultaneously caring and cruel, simultaneously seeking connection and pushing it away. Toxic Rick, freed from the moderating influence of the rest of his personality, is simply the self-destructive and cruel and connection-avoiding parts, without the counterbalance. He is one side of a very complicated coin, separated from the other side. This makes him, in some ways, more straightforward than the main Rick, more predictable, in a grim sort of way. The main Rick can surprise you because he contains so much. Toxic Rick contains only a portion of that, and so his behavior follows more directly from what he is. There is something important to note about what the episode is not saying. It is not saying that the toxic parts of a person are good. It is not saying that grief and fear and self-destructive behavior are virtues that should be celebrated. It is not suggesting that pain is inherently noble. What it is saying is more nuanced than that. It is saying that these things, however painful, are part of a complete human experience, that they arise from real experiences, real losses, real wounds, that they serve, however imperfectly, as ways of processing and surviving those experiences, and that a person who has had all of that removed from them is not a better person, just a less complete one. The episode uses the concept of toxicity in an interesting way. The word toxic suggests something inherently harmful, something that should be eliminated. But the episode challenges that frame. It suggests that what we call toxic in a person may sometimes be better understood as wounded, as pain that has not yet found a way to heal, as grief that has not yet been allowed to speak, as fear that is real and valid, even if it sometimes drives behavior that causes harm. Toxic Rick, stripped of the rest of himself, is unable to do the work of integration. He cannot grow or change or find a way to carry his pain that causes less damage. He simply is what he is, extracted and isolated. But in the context of the whole Rick, these elements have the potential to be part of something more complex, something that can, with time, become more fully human. Let us also note what Toxic Morty represents in the episode, briefly, before we return to Toxic Rick. Toxic Morty carries Morty's self-destructive patterns, his neediness, his tendency to make poor decisions when it comes to relationships and self-worth. He is, like Toxic Rick, the extracted, difficult parts of his counterpart. And he too, when separated, simply acts out those patterns without the moderating influence of the rest of Morty's personality. The detoxified Morty, meanwhile, becomes highly functional and successful. He gets into relationships with ease. He performs well socially. He seems, by most external measures, to be doing better than the original Morty ever did. But he is also missing the depth that comes from having struggled, from having lost, from having made mistakes and survived them. He is smooth and successful, but also, somehow, thinner, less substantial, less real. Both the Rick and Morty storylines in this episode arrive at the same conclusion, that the difficult parts of a person are not simply obstacles to be removed. They are threads in the fabric of who that person is. Remove them, and the fabric changes. It may look cleaner, but it no longer holds the same weight. Toxic Rick, then, is not exactly a Rick variant in the sense that Doofus Rick or Simple Rick are. He is not a Rick from another dimension. He is a portion of the main Rick, given physical form and independence. He is a Rick who exists only as a fragment of what Rick fully is. But he is included in our exploration of Rick variants because he reveals something important that the others cannot. He reveals what lies beneath. He shows us the painful core that the main Rick carries, usually hidden beneath genius and humor and the constant forward momentum of adventure. He makes visible what is usually invisible, and in doing so, he gives us a kind of portrait of the main Rick that is both more brutal and more honest than what we usually get. He is Rick without the defenses, Rick without the performance, Rick as wound, as loss, as fear. That is not easy to look at, but it is real, and the show honors that reality by bringing it into the light, even briefly, even through the strange mechanism of an interdimensional detox spa. As we close this section, let us carry Toxic Rick quietly with us for a moment, not as a lesson, not as a warning, but simply as a recognition. Every person carries things that are difficult. Every person has parts of themselves that are painful, that have been shaped by loss or fear or grief or disappointment. And those parts are not simply problems to be solved. They are parts of a person. They are the record of a life that has been lived, with all of its difficulties and its costs. The main Rick is not better for having those parts. He is not worse for having them either. He is simply complete. He is a person who has lived through real experiences and been shaped by them, as all people are. And in the vast, strange, infinitely varied multiverse of Rick and Morty, that completeness, that fullness, is its own kind of thing. Let your breath be slow and easy. Let the weight of your thoughts soften, as thoughts do in the hours before sleep. We have 2 more sections behind us, and more ahead of us still, each one a gentle step further into the world of Ricks and what they show us about themselves. Rest as we move forward. There is no need to hold on to anything. Section 5. The Citadel of Ricks. The night deepens. The world outside grows quieter, and you are here, resting, letting the words come to you like the sound of a distant river, soft and steady and without urgency. In this section, we are going to spend time with the place that brings so many Ricks together, the place that appears in multiple episodes across multiple seasons, and that serves as the backdrop for some of the most interesting explorations of what it means to be a Rick. That place is the Citadel of Ricks. The Citadel is, in many ways, the heart of the multiverse, as Rick and Morty presents it. It is where the implications of infinite Ricks become most visible. It is where the question of what a society of Ricks might look like gets its most detailed answer. And it is a place that is, like so much in this show, both extraordinary and deeply, recognizably human. The Citadel first appears in a significant way in the 10th episode of the first season, Close Rick Counters of the Rick Kind. This is the episode where the main Rick is accused of murdering other Ricks, and he and Morty are brought before the Council of Ricks to answer for it. It is in this episode that we get our first real look at what the Citadel is and how it functions. But it is in the 3rd season, particularly in the Ricklantis mix-up, that the Citadel receives its most extensive and detailed portrayal. In this episode, the main Rick and Morty go on an adventure elsewhere, and the entire episode focuses on the Citadel itself, following multiple storylines happening simultaneously within it. What the episode reveals is a society that is recognizable in its basic structure, even if its membership is unusual. The Citadel is a city, essentially. It has neighborhoods, it has industries, it has schools and police forces and factories and political systems. It has a social hierarchy. It has inequality. It has people at the top who have power and people at the bottom who do not. It has, in other words, all the features of a human society built and maintained by people who are not exactly human in the usual sense, but who have organized themselves in ways that are thoroughly human in their patterns. Let us begin with the physical space of the Citadel. What does it look like? What do we see when the camera moves through it? The Citadel exists in the space between dimensions, or at least it is accessible from that space. It is a large, built environment with the feel of a city. There are streets and buildings and public spaces. There are areas that feel prosperous and areas that feel run down. There are places where Ricks who are doing well spend their time, and places where Ricks who are not doing well end up. The architecture of the Citadel has a particular aesthetic, functional and slightly worn, like a place that was built with great ambition and has since settled into a kind of ordinary reality. The shine has come off certain parts of it. The corners where ambition once lived are now places where everyday life happens instead. This is not an accident. The show is deliberately constructing the Citadel as a place that has the feel of any large human city. The grandeur of the original vision for it is visible in certain structures, certain spaces, but the day-to-day reality of what it has become is something more complicated, more worn, more like the real cities that humans build and live in. The population of the Citadel consists, as mentioned, of Ricks and Mortys. Ricks from across the multiverse who have come to the Citadel either permanently or as visitors, and Mortys, their counterparts from those same dimensions who have come along with them. Within this population, there is a clear hierarchy. Ricks, generally speaking, hold more power and more status than Mortys. The Citadel was built by Ricks and is largely run by Ricks. Mortys are present throughout, but they are often in service roles or in positions that reflect the lower status they hold within the power structure. This is an interesting dynamic and one that the show explores explicitly in the Ricklantis mix-up. The episode follows several Morty characters who are navigating this hierarchy in different ways. Some have internalized it. Some are pushing back against it. Some are trying to work within the system to find success, and some are challenging the system itself. But for the purposes of this particular section, let us focus on the Ricks, on the different kinds of Ricks who populate the Citadel and the different roles they play within it. One of the most striking things about the Citadel, as the show presents it, is that the Ricks who live and work there are not all the same. They are all recognizably Ricks, all sharing that basic appearance, that white hair, and that particular face. But they have been assigned to, or have found themselves in, very different circumstances. There are Ricks who work as police officers on the Citadel. These Ricks maintain order within the city. They respond to crimes. They enforce rules. They deal with the day-to-day realities of keeping a large population of Ricks and Mortys functioning as a society. Being a police Rick on the Citadel is not necessarily a prestigious position. It is a practical one, a necessary one. And the episode shows us what it is like to do that job day after day in a society that is not always orderly or grateful. There are Ricks who work in factories. Like the simple Rick facility we discussed in the previous section, the Citadel has industrial facilities that produce goods, and those facilities require workers. Ricks who show up, do the labor, and go home. Ricks who are not adventuring through the multiverse or pushing the boundaries of science, but simply earning a living in the most ordinary sense of the phrase. There are Ricks who run for political office. The Citadel, in the episode, is in the midst of a political election, and among the candidates running is a Rick who represents, in some sense, the aspirations of the ordinary Ricks of the Citadel. Not a Rick from the top of the hierarchy, but a Rick from the middle, someone who claims to speak for the Ricks who have been overlooked. This political storyline is one of the more complex parts of the Ricklantis mix-up, and it ends in a direction that is dark and surprising and very much in keeping with the show's general skepticism about power and the people who seek it. We will not go into all the details here, but the political storyline reveals something important about the Citadel, that it is not immune to the same kinds of corruption and manipulation that characterize human political systems, that a society of geniuses is still a society with all the vulnerabilities that implies. There are also Ricks who live in what might be called the margins of the Citadel, the less prosperous areas, the neighborhoods where resources are scarce and opportunities are limited. These Ricks have not found success within the Citadel's hierarchy. They have not risen to positions of power or influence. They are simply living in circumstances that are constrained and difficult, doing their best within a system that has not been generous to them. The existence of struggling Ricks on the Citadel is one of the more quietly powerful things the show presents, because the assumption that attaches to the name Rick Sanchez is one of supreme competence and capability. The main Rick is, by almost any measure, extraordinarily gifted. He can do things that no one else in the universe can do. He is, in his own particular domain, essentially unmatched. So what does it mean when there are Ricks who are not successful? When there are Ricks who are living in reduced circumstances, working ordinary jobs, dealing with the ordinary frustrations of a life that has not gone particularly well. It means that genius alone is not enough to guarantee a good life. It means that the circumstances a person finds themselves in, the world they are born into, the society they have to navigate, can shape outcomes as profoundly as individual ability. Even a Rick, even someone with that particular set of gifts, can end up in a difficult situation if the world around them is structured in ways that are not favorable. The Citadel makes this point visually and narratively. It shows us Ricks who are struggling, and in doing so, it humanizes them. It brings them down from the pedestal that the concept of Rick Sanchez sometimes implies, and places them on the ordinary ground of human experience, where talent and effort do not always translate into success, and where the structures of the world around you matter enormously. The Council of Ricks is another important element of the Citadel's political structure. This council, which appears in the first season episode and is referenced in later episodes, is the governing body that makes decisions for the Citadel as a whole. It is made up of Ricks who have risen to positions of significant power and authority. The Council of Ricks represents the institutionalized side of Rick identity. It is Ricks who have decided that organizing, governing, and maintaining the structures of their society is a worthwhile use of their considerable abilities. It is Ricks who have, in some sense, committed to the project of the Citadel and taken responsibility for its functioning. This is interesting precisely because it is not what you might expect of Rick Sanchez. The main Rick is, by nature, resistant to authority and to institutions. He does not like being told what to do. He does not want to be part of a governing body. He does not fit comfortably into organizational structures of any kind. And yet, there are Ricks who do fill those roles. Ricks who have found in the governance of the Citadel something that satisfies them, a purpose, a structure, a way of applying their intelligence and ability to a collective project rather than an individual one. Whether this represents a different kind of Rick temperament, or a different kind of Rick history, or simply a different set of choices made along the way, the show does not fully specify, but it shows us these Ricks, governing and organizing and making decisions, and in doing so, it expands our sense of what a Rick can be. The Citadel is also, importantly, a place where Ricks encounter each other on a regular basis, where Ricks from different dimensions see other Ricks, interact with them, compare themselves to them, and are forced to reckon with the fact that they are not unique. For most Ricks, in their home dimensions, they are singular. There is no one else quite like them. Their intelligence and their capabilities set them apart from everyone around them. They are, in a certain sense, alone, at the top of whatever hierarchy their particular world contains. On the Citadel, that singularity disappears. Every Rick is surrounded by other Ricks. Every Rick's intelligence and capability is matched, in broad terms, by the intelligence and capability of everyone else around them. The thing that made them special in their home dimension is on the Citadel simply ordinary. This has to be a strange experience, and the show acknowledges this strangeness in various ways. Some Ricks on the Citadel seem to have adapted to it fairly easily. Others seem to carry a kind of restlessness, a need to reassert their specialness in whatever ways remain available to them. The political ambitions, the power dynamics, the hierarchies that develop within the Citadel, all of these can be understood, in part, as responses to the uncomfortable experience of no longer being the most remarkable person in the room. There is also something to be said about the relationship between the Citadel and the main Rick. Because the main Rick has a complicated relationship with the Citadel, he is, in some sense, part of its community. He is a Rick, and the Citadel is the place where Ricks have gathered. But he has also consistently resisted full integration into the Citadel's structure. He does not want to be governed by the Council of Ricks. He does not want to follow the Citadel's rules. He does not want to be just another Rick in a city full of Ricks. This tension is part of what makes the main Rick a particular kind of Rick. He is a Rick who has managed, more than most, to remain individual, to resist the pull toward the collective, to maintain his own particular identity and his own particular way of moving through the world, even in the face of an institution that would like to absorb him. Whether this resistance is admirable or simply a different kind of limitation is something the show leaves open, but it characterizes the main Rick's relationship to the Citadel as something more complex than simply belonging or not belonging. He is connected to it, and yet always at a slight angle to it.
Never quite inside, never quite outside. The Citadel of Ricks, as an image, as a concept, as a place, offers us something that is genuinely unusual in fiction. A society made up entirely of variations on a single character. A city where every face you see is the same face, but different. Where every person you encounter shares the same name, the same basic history, the same fundamental nature, and yet has become something distinct, something particular, something that cannot quite be predicted from the template alone. It is, in its own way, a meditation on identity, on what makes a person who they are, and what makes them different from another person who shares all their surface characteristics. It is a question the show asks by placing all these Ricks in the same space and letting us watch what happens. And what happens, as always in Rick and Morty, is complicated. There is kindness and there is cruelty. There is ambition and resignation. There is hope and cynicism. There is all of the texture of human life, expressed through a population that shares a single name and a single face, but has lived 1,000 different lives. As we close this section on the Citadel of Ricks, let us hold that image for a moment. All those Ricks, in all those roles, in all those circumstances. Police Ricks, and factory Ricks, and political Ricks, and struggling Ricks, and successful Ricks, and Ricks who have given up, and Ricks who are still fighting. All of them sharing a city. All of them navigating the same basic human problems: power and belonging and purpose and worth and connection through the lens of their particular circumstances. All of them real in the world of the show, and each one worth a moment of attention. Let that image settle softly, like snow settling on a still landscape. No urgency, no rush, just the quiet accumulation of one idea upon another, building something calm and complete. Your breathing is slow, your body is at rest. We move forward gently into the next section. Section 6, Afro Rick. Stay with me, quietly. The world outside is still. The night has fully arrived, wrapping everything in its soft and settled dark. You are exactly where you belong. In this section, we are going to look at a specific Rick variant whose appearances in the show are brief, but visually distinct and worth examining carefully. This is a Rick who appears in 2 separate episodes of the 3rd season in ways that place him within the world of the Citadel and the broader story of Rick variants. This is the Rick who is sometimes referred to as Black Rick or Afro Rick for his distinctive appearance. He has dark skin and a large natural afro, which sets him immediately apart from the main Rick in visual terms, even as his overall design retains all the other characteristic features of Rick Sanchez. Let us talk about his appearances with care and precision, describing only what is actually shown in the episodes themselves. The first of his appearances occurs in the Season 3 premiere, The Rick Shank Rickdemption. This is the episode that opens the 3rd season with an extended and complex sequence involving the Galactic Federation and the Citadel of Ricks, and the main Rick's escape from a federal prison where he has been held. The episode is a busy one, full of action and plot movement. Within it, there are several scenes that take place in the context of the Citadel and the Council of Ricks. And in these scenes, among the assembled Ricks who are responding to the crisis of the main Rick situation, this particular Rick appears as part of the group. He is visible in the background of the council setting. He is one of many Ricks who are gathered, who are part of the institutional structure of the Citadel, who are responding to the events of the episode from within that structure. He is not given a speaking role in this sequence. He is not singled out for individual attention. He is part of the assembled group of Ricks, present and visible, contributing to the sense of the Citadel as a populated and varied community. What his presence in this scene tells us is something simple and important: that the Rick Sanchez of the multiverse is not limited to any one appearance. That across the infinite variations of the multiverse, Rick can and does appear in a wide range of forms, with a wide range of physical characteristics. The main Rick, in his default presentation,
is a pale, white-haired older man. That is the version of Rick we know most intimately, but the multiverse does not restrict Rick to that appearance. In other dimensions, Rick Sanchez grew up in different circumstances, was shaped by different histories, and emerged with different physical characteristics.
The afro and the dark skin of this particular Rick are markers of a different dimensional history, a different set of cultural and family circumstances that shaped a different version of the same essential figure. The show does not make a big deal of this. It does not pause to explain it or underline it with commentary.
It simply includes this Rick as part of the background of the scene, as one of many Ricks, as a natural expression of the multiverse's breadth. And in doing so, it quietly makes the point that diversity is the natural condition of an infinite multiverse. That it would be strange, in fact, if all the infinite Ricks looked identical. The second and more extended appearance of this Rick variant occurs in the Ricklantis mix-up, the 7th episode of the 3rd season. This episode, as we have discussed in previous sections, focuses entirely on the Citadel of Ricks, following multiple storylines simultaneously. In this episode, this Rick appears in a more visible way, as part of one of the episode's storylines. He is among the Ricks who are present in the Citadel during the events of the episode, which include a political campaign, the factory storyline involving Simple Rick, and a storyline following a police partnership between a Rick and a Morty. His presence in this episode contributes to the portrait of the Citadel as a diverse and populated place.
Within the frames that show the Citadel's public spaces, its streets and gathering areas, he is visible among the other Ricks and Mortys who make up the population of that world. What is visually notable about his design, beyond his distinctive appearance, is the care with which the show has rendered him. He is not a hasty background detail. He is a fully realized visual design, a Rick who looks and moves and is presented as a complete character within the world, even if his individual story is not highlighted in the same way that some other characters in the episode receive extended focus. This level of care in the background character design is something the show is generally attentive to. The Citadel scenes in the Ricklantis mix-up are populated with Ricks who each have their own visual details, their own slight variations, their own sense of being specific people rather than generic crowd members. And this Rick is part of that detailed tapestry. The afro, in particular, is a strong visual design choice. It gives this Rick an immediate distinctiveness within a crowd of white-haired Ricks. It draws the eye. It signals, clearly and without words, that this is a Rick who comes from a different background, a different dimension, a different version of the world that produced him. Let us think for a moment about what it means for the multiverse that a Rick like this exists. What does his appearance tell us about the range of dimensions and histories that the show is implying? If the main Rick's white hair is a product of his particular biology and his particular aging process, then the afro of this variant tells us that in his dimension, the Rick Sanchez lineage took a different path, different genetic history, different ancestral circumstances, different family background many generations back that produced a different physical inheritance. And that different physical inheritance is the product of a different history. Not just a different history for Rick specifically, but a different history for the family that produced him, the community that surrounded him, the dimension that shaped him. In this Rick's universe, things unfolded differently, in ways that extended back through generations, until they produced a version of Rick Sanchez who looks like this particular person. All of that history is implied, rather than stated. The show does not narrate it for us, but it is there, in the design, in the existence of this character. The afro is a marker of a rich and different past, of a lineage that arrived at the same essential figure through a different route. It is worth pausing here to appreciate what the show is doing with its presentation of Rick variants more broadly. The infinite multiverse, as the show presents it, does not produce an infinite array of white, middle-aged, male scientists named Rick Sanchez. It produces an infinite array of variations. Some of those variations differ in personality, some differ in intelligence and capability, some differ in the choices they have made, and some, as this particular Rick shows us, differ in their physical appearance, their racial and ethnic heritage, the visible markers of the different histories that produce them. This is a natural consequence of the multiverse, as the show defines it. If infinite universes exist, with infinite variations in history and circumstance,
then the people who emerge from those universes will reflect those variations in every possible dimension, including the dimension of physical appearance and racial heritage. The show acknowledges this quietly but consistently. In the crowd scenes of the Citadel, there are multiple Ricks with different skin tones, different hair textures, different physical characteristics. The main Rick's appearance is the template we are most familiar with, but it is not presented as the default or the norm. It is simply one of many possible expressions of the character. This Rick with the afro is the most visually prominent of these variant appearances, and so he tends to be the one that viewers remember most clearly from these scenes.
He stands out against a crowd of white-haired Ricks in a way that makes him immediately identifiable. He is easy to spot, easy to remember, and because he is easy to remember, he carries a kind of significance within the visual landscape of these episodes. He is a reminder, visible and clear, that the multiverse is genuinely infinite, that it contains not just variations in personality and intelligence and life history, but variations in all the dimensions that make a person who they are, including the dimensions that are visible on their face and in their hair. In a show about infinite possibility, about the endless variations that existence can take, this is an important point to make visually. And the show makes it without fanfare, without editorial commentary, without treating it as a remarkable or unusual thing. It simply includes him, in the background of these scenes, as one Rick among many, as one valid expression of the character among an infinite number of valid expressions. There is also something worth noting about the specific episodes in which he appears. Both the Rickshank Redemption and the Ricklantis Mix-Up are episodes that deal extensively with the Citadel's politics and power structures. They are episodes about how the Citadel is organized, who holds power within it, and what happens when that power is challenged or disrupted. In the Rickshank Redemption, the Citadel as an institution is fundamentally changed by the end of the episode due to actions taken by the main Rick. In the Ricklantis Mix-Up, the Citadel is shown to be a place of real political contest, where different factions within the Rick population are competing for influence and control. The fact that this Rick appears in both of these political contexts is interesting, even if his role in each is primarily as a background presence. He is part of the political community of the Citadel. He is one of the Ricks who are affected by the changes and contests that these episodes describe. He is present in the world where these events are happening, a citizen of the Citadel, subject to its systems and its politics like any other Rick. His presence in these scenes is a reminder that the Citadel's politics are not just the concern of the Ricks we are following in the foreground. They affect all the Ricks. Every Rick on the Citadel, regardless of their position in the hierarchy, regardless of their visual appearance, regardless of the dimension they came from, is part of this community and is shaped by how it is governed and how it changes. The political events of these episodes have consequences for all of them. The restructuring of the Citadel in the Rickshank Redemption affects every Rick who lives there. The political campaign in the Ricklantis Mix-Up determines who will hold power and how that power will be used, and those decisions ripple out to affect everyone in the community. This Rick, in the background of these scenes, is part of that everyone. He is not just a visual detail. He is a member of the community that these political events are happening within. He is real, in the world of the show, and what happens in the Citadel happens to him too. As we close this section, let us sit for a moment with the quiet significance of this character's presence. In a show about infinite variation, about the endless ways that the same essential person can be expressed across the multiverse, he represents something simple and clear. He is evidence that the multiverse is genuinely diverse, that Rick Sanchez is not a fixed image, a single set of physical characteristics frozen in one form. He is a name, a spirit, a particular kind of person who can and does appear in many forms across the infinite range of worlds. The afro and the dark skin are not markers of a lesser or greater Rick. They are simply markers of a different Rick, shaped by a different history, emerging from a different world. In every way that matters, he is Rick Sanchez. He is a genius. He is a scientist. He is a grandfather and a traveler and a member of the Citadel's community. He is one point on the infinite spectrum of what Rick can be. And in the quiet background of those scenes, he stands as a gentle and clear reminder that the multiverse does not have a default setting. It has infinite settings, each one valid, each one real,
each one worth a moment of recognition. Let your eyes feel heavy. Let your breath settle into its slowest, most comfortable rhythm. We continue forward, gently, into the next section. Section 7. Background and minor Rick variants. Breathe in slowly and out slowly. The night holds everything gently, and you are held within it. There is no need to do anything but rest and listen. In this section, we are going to widen our gaze. We are going to move away from the individual Rick variants we have been focusing on in previous sections and look instead at the broader population of Ricks that the show presents across its crowd scenes, its Citadel sequences, and its various glimpses into the multiverse's variety. These are the Ricks who do not have individual names or individual storylines. They are the Ricks who appear in the background, or in passing, or in brief visual details that might be easy to miss on a first viewing. They are minor characters in the traditional sense of that phrase, but each one is a small window into the range of what the multiverse contains. Each one, if you look carefully, tells its own quiet story. Let us begin with the visual landscape of the Citadel as it appears in the Ricklantis mix-up. This episode, more than any other, gives us an extended look at the Citadel as a populated place. As the camera moves through its streets and spaces, we see a variety of Ricks going about their ordinary lives. And within that variety, there are details worth noticing. There are Ricks in workwear, Ricks in coveralls, suggesting they work in the physical trades of the Citadel, in maintenance, in construction, in the day-to-day upkeep of the infrastructure that keeps the city functioning. These Ricks carry themselves differently than the Ricks who wear the more formal or professional attire of the Citadel's higher status positions. They have a different kind of tiredness about them, a physical tiredness, the kind that comes from work that is done with the body rather than the mind. There are Ricks in suits, Ricks who have achieved a level of success within the Citadel's hierarchy that allows them to dress in ways that signal status and authority. These Ricks move through the spaces of the Citadel with a kind of ease that the working Ricks do not always have. They have more comfortable positions in the hierarchy, more resources, more options. There are Ricks who look young. Not young in the sense that the main Rick would find remarkable, since all Ricks are, fundamentally, aging men, but young relative to other Ricks. Ricks who have perhaps not been traveling the multiverse as long as others, or who have lived lives that have been less physically taxing. Ricks whose faces carry fewer lines, whose posture has not yet settled into the particular curve that comes with decades of complex interdimensional adventure. There are Ricks who look old, even older than the main Rick, if that is possible. Ricks whose white hair is thinner, whose movements are slower, whose faces carry the marks of a very long life. These Ricks have been through more, in some sense. They have lived longer, or lived harder, or both, and their appearance reflects that accumulation. There are Ricks who are heavy, and Ricks who are thin, Ricks who stand tall, and Ricks who have developed the kind of slight stoop that comes from years of standing at a lab bench or hunching over a workbench. Ricks who seem full of energy, and Ricks who seem to have long since found a quieter pace. Each of these physical variations tells us something, if we pay attention. The physical form of a person is, in part, the record of their life, how they have lived, what they have done, what stresses and pleasures and circumstances have shaped them from the outside. And for Ricks, this is as true as for anyone. A Rick who has spent most of his life in physical labor will carry that life in his body differently than a Rick who has spent most of his life in a laboratory. A Rick who has traveled constantly, who has been through extreme experiences, will look different from a Rick who has lived more settled, more contained. These differences are visible, if subtly, in the background Ricks of the Citadel scenes. The show is attentive to these details. The animation team has taken care to make the Ricks of the Citadel visually varied in ways that feel consistent with the logic of the multiverse. Each of them is Rick, recognizably and completely, but each of them is also a particular Rick, shaped by a particular life. Let us talk about the Ricks who appear in specific roles within the Citadel scenes. Beyond the police Ricks and factory Ricks we have already mentioned, there are Ricks who appear to be vendors. Ricks who are standing behind stalls or in shops, selling things to other Ricks and Mortys who pass by. These Ricks have set up small businesses within the Citadel's commercial spaces. They have found a niche, a particular thing they can offer to the community, and they are making their living from it. This is a remarkable image when you sit with it for a moment. Rick Sanchez, the genius scientist, the interdimensional traveler, the figure who can bend the laws of physics with his left hand while sipping from a flask with his right, running a small shop in a city, selling things to passers-by. It is mundane in the most profound sense of that word. It is the most ordinary possible version of a person who, in another universe, is anything but ordinary. And yet, in the context of the Citadel, it makes perfect sense. The Citadel needs commerce, it needs goods and services, and the Ricks who fill those roles are the ones who provide them. They have found their place within the system, and their place is this small, ordinary, essential one. There are Ricks who appear to be arguing with each other, not dramatically, not in the way that becomes a plot point, but simply arguing, as people do in cities, about small things, about everyday disagreements, about the friction that comes from living in close proximity to other people with different perspectives. The sight of Ricks arguing with each other is, in a way, quite funny. These are geniuses. These are people who understand the multiverse at a level that most beings cannot even approach, and they are arguing about, presumably, ordinary things, about parking spots, or business disagreements, or social slights, or any of the 100 small sources of friction that make up daily life in a city. But of course they are, because the genius is only part of who they are. The rest is ordinary human life, with all its friction and irritability and small disagreements. The multiverse does not exempt anyone from the basics, and a citadel full of geniuses is still a city. And cities have arguments. There are Ricks who appear to be in social groups, standing together in the way that groups of people stand together when they are comfortable with each other, not just coexisting in the same space, but genuinely gathered, genuinely in conversation, genuinely at ease with the other Ricks around them. This social ease is worth noticing because the main Rick does not often display it. The main Rick is, in many ways, a solitary figure who keeps his connections carefully managed and who is rarely simply comfortable in a crowd. But these background Ricks have found social groups within the Citadel. They have developed friendships, or at least comfortable acquaintanceships. They have found people, other Ricks and Mortys, with whom they like to spend time. This suggests that the capacity for social connection is there in the Rick character. It is not absent, it is simply suppressed in the main Rick by other things. In these background Ricks, in the ordinary social life of the Citadel, it has been allowed to express itself, and the result is something that looks, from the outside, simply like people enjoying each other's company. There are also Ricks who appear in the episode's various storylines in minor supporting roles. They have speaking lines, brief ones, or they are part of scenes where they react to events happening around them. They are not main characters, but they are more than pure background. There is a Rick who appears in the factory storyline in a supervisory role. He is the Rick who is in charge of the workers, who gives instructions, who represents the management side of the factory operation. This Rick is a Rick who has risen within the factory's hierarchy. He is not a laborer, but a supervisor, someone who has been given authority over others. The way he exercises that authority, briefly shown in the episode, tells us something about him. He is not a kind supervisor. He is not particularly interested in the welfare of the Ricks working under him. He is interested in production, in output, in keeping the operation running as efficiently as possible. The workers are, to him, instruments of that efficiency. This is, of course, a reflection of the broader dynamics of the Citadel. The hierarchy that places some Ricks above others has not made the higher-placed Ricks into better people in any moral sense. It has simply given them authority, and authority, as the show knows well, does not automatically produce wisdom or kindness. There is a Rick in the political storyline who appears as a campaign worker, a Rick who has thrown his energy into supporting the candidate who is working the phones and knocking on the equivalent of doors and doing the practical work of political organizing. This Rick is a believer. He has decided that this particular political moment, this particular candidate, represents something worth working for. His belief may or may not be justified. The episode's political storyline ends in ways that complicate simple assessments of who is right and who is wrong. But the campaign worker Rick is a reminder that within the Citadel's political life, as within any political life, there are people who genuinely invest themselves in the process, who believe that the outcome matters, and act accordingly. Let us look also at the Mortys who appear in the background of the Citadel scenes, because they are part of the portrait the show is painting, even if they are not Ricks. The Mortys of the Citadel are, in some ways, in a more complicated position than the Ricks. They are present because their Ricks brought them there, or because they have, in some cases, separated from their Ricks and found themselves on the Citadel alone. They are part of the community, but not always fully members of it in the way that the Ricks are. There are Mortys who appear content.
Mortys who seem to have found a comfortable place within the Citadel's structure, a role or a community that works for them. They are going about their lives with a kind of ease that suggests they have made peace with their circumstances. There are Mortys who appear less content, Mortys who are navigating the Citadel with a kind of wariness, who are aware of their lower status within the hierarchy and who are managing that awareness in different ways. Some with resignation, some with frustration, some with a kind of strategic patience, waiting for the right moment or the right opportunity. The background Mortys are important because they remind us that the Citadel is not just a world of Ricks, it is a world that contains both Ricks and Mortys, and the dynamic between them is always present, always shaping the texture of the place. The Ricks are the founders, the builders, the primary powers within the Citadel, but the Mortys are there too, and their presence changes what the Citadel is. It is not a purely Rick society. It is a mixed one, with all the complexity that implies. And within that complexity, there are moments of genuine connection between individual Ricks and individual Mortys. Moments where the hierarchy seems to dissolve briefly, and what is left is just two people dealing with the same world. These moments are visible in the Citadel scenes, if you look carefully. A Rick and a Morty talking in a way that seems genuinely mutual. A Rick and a Morty navigating a difficulty together. Small moments in the background, but real ones. Let us also take note of what we do not see in the Citadel's background characters, because the absences are as informative as the presences. We do not see Ricks who are dressed or behaving in ways that are completely alien to the concept of Rick Sanchez. The background Ricks are all recognizably Ricks. They share the essential character. They are all old men, or late middle-aged men, with white hair and the particular Rick face. They wear clothes that, whatever their specific style, feel consistent with the broad range of what a Rick might wear. The multiverse, as the show presents it, does seem to have some organizing logic. The Ricks who end up at the Citadel are the Ricks who have developed the ability to travel between dimensions, which requires a certain level of scientific achievement. This shared capability creates a kind of minimum threshold. The Ricks at the Citadel are all, at some level, the version of Rick who got to that particular scientific milestone. That does not make them identical. But it does mean that the Citadel's population, while diverse, is not completely random. There is a selection effect. The Ricks here are all the ones who made it here, who developed the specific capability that interdimensional travel requires. Ricks who did not reach that milestone, whatever other paths their lives took, are not present. This selection effect is worth thinking about as you consider the background and minor Ricks of the Citadel. All of these Ricks, from the vendor behind his stall, to the supervisor in the factory, to the campaign worker in the political office, all of them achieved something remarkable by the standards of their home dimensions. All of them figured out something that most beings never figure out. All of them crossed the threshold into interdimensional travel. That they ended up in the background of someone else's story, in the ordinary middle of a society, rather than at the extraordinary heights of individual adventure, does not diminish what they achieve. It simply means that achievement and adventure are different things. That having done something remarkable is not the same as being celebrated for it. That within a community where everyone has done the same remarkable thing, that thing is no longer remarkable. It is simply the entry requirement. And so these Ricks find themselves in the same position that many extraordinary people find themselves in when they enter a community of extraordinary people. They discover that their extraordinary thing is ordinary here, and that they have to build a new identity within the context of this community, based on whatever makes them distinct within it rather than distinct from everything else. Some of them do this well, some of them struggle with it, and all of them, in their different ways, are navigating the particular challenge of being extraordinary by one standard and ordinary by another. As we close this section, let us take a moment to appreciate the collective portrait that these background and minor Ricks create together. Each one, individually, is a small detail, a single stroke in a large painting, but together,
They create something rich and specific, the texture of the Citadel as a living place. A real community with real variety, real complexity, real human dimensions. The show does not need to give each of these Ricks a name and a story. It gives them instead the dignity of detail, the care of their visual design, the specific way they move through the space of the episodes, the reality of their presence in the world of the Citadel. That is enough. That is, in fact, more than enough. It creates a world that feels inhabited, that feels real in the particular way that well-crafted fiction feels real.
It invites us to imagine the stories that are not told, the lives that are not followed,
The Ricks who are there in the background, being just as real and just as complete as the ones in the foreground. Let that settle over you now, gently and completely.
a world full of real people going about their real lives in the background of each other's stories.
Section 8. Differences between Rick variants. The quiet settles around you, deep and soft. Your breathing is easy and slow. Let the words come to you without effort, without needing to hold them tightly. They will stay. We have now met, in one way or another, several of the Rick variants that the show has presented to us. We have spent time with Doofus Rick and Simple Rick and Toxic Rick. We have looked at the visually distinct Rick with the afro. We have moved through the background Ricks of the Citadel. And along the way, we have been building a picture of something that is now worth addressing more directly. What are the differences between all these Ricks? What makes each one distinct from the others? And what do those differences tell us about the nature of identity and of character,
And of the ways that the same essential person can become many different things.
Let us begin with the most obvious category of difference, and then move inward toward the more subtle ones. The most obvious differences between Rick variants are the physical ones. We have already talked about this in the context of the Afro Rick and the broader diversity of the Citadel's population. Different Ricks have different physical appearances, reflecting the different genetic histories and biological circumstances of the different dimensions they come from.
These physical differences are real, but they are not, in the show's presentation, the most significant source of difference between Ricks.
The show is much more interested in the differences that are less visible, the differences in personality, in emotional life, in the choices and values that have shaped each Rick into a particular kind of person. And those differences are considerable. The most fundamental difference between Rick variants, as the show presents it, seems to be in the area of emotional openness. Some Ricks are more closed, more defended, more protected behind layers of irony and contempt and genius as armor. Others are more open, more available, more willing to simply be present and genuine in their interactions with others. Doofus Rick, as we discussed,
Is an example of a Rick who is extremely open. He is warm and kind and genuine
in a way that the main Rick often is not. He has not built the same walls. He has not learned the same defenses. And the result is a person who, while dismissed by other Ricks, is actually much more accessible and much more genuinely kind. Simple Rick, in his moment of happiness, represents another kind of openness. He allowed himself to be fully present in the experience of fatherhood, fully available to the joy of watching his daughter grow, in a way that allowed that experience to become the defining fact of his emotional life. He was not defended against it. He was open to it, and it moved him, completely and genuinely. The main Rick, by contrast, is often characterized by a kind of strategic closure. He cares deeply, but he rarely shows it directly. He loves, but he expresses that love through behavior that is indirect and often confusing. He has been hurt,
and he has built elaborate systems to protect himself from being hurt again.
This is not unique to the main Rick among the variants. Many of the Ricks we see on the Citadel seem to have some version of this protective closure. It is, in some ways, a characteristic feature of the Rick temperament. Something about being Rick, about having the kind of intelligence and the kind of experiences that come with that intelligence, tends to produce a person who has difficulty being emotionally open. But not all Ricks. Doofus Rick shows us that it is possible to be Rick and not have those walls, to have the same basic character and the same basic nature without having built the same elaborate defenses. And that tells us something important. The closure is not inevitable. It is the product of specific experiences and specific choices. It is something that happened to most Ricks, not something that is intrinsic to what it means to be Rick. Another significant axis of difference between Rick variants is in the area of ambition and drive. The main Rick is intensely driven. He is always moving, always doing, always engaged in some project or adventure or confrontation with the universe. His energy is enormous, and his appetite for engagement seems almost unlimited. Other Ricks are less driven in this particular way. The Ricks who work ordinary jobs on the Citadel, who run small businesses, or work in factories, or walk police beats. These Ricks have, in some sense, settled. They have found a level of engagement with the world that does not require them to be constantly pushing at the boundaries of what is possible. Whether this is a choice or a circumstance is hard to say from what the show gives us. Some Ricks may have chosen a quieter life. Others may have found themselves in quiet lives due to circumstances beyond their control. Limited resources, limited access to equipment or knowledge. Limited opportunities in the dimensions they came from. But the effect is the same. A Rick who exists at a different energy level than the main Rick. A Rick who has found a different kind of equilibrium with the world, one that involves less constant motion and more ordinary routine. Related to this is the difference in how different Ricks relate to the idea of adventure. For the main Rick, adventure is not just something he does, it is something he needs. It is woven into his sense of identity in a very deep way. The adventure, the constant movement through the strange and dangerous reaches of the multiverse, is part of what makes his life feel like his. Other Ricks may have had this same need at some point in their lives and found it satisfied or redirected or simply no longer present. The Factory Rick has presumably been to many unusual places, has seen many extraordinary things, but something happened at some point that brought him to the factory floor and kept him there. The adventure became a memory rather than a current fact. This is not necessarily a tragedy, though it can be presented in ways that feel melancholy. It can also simply be the natural arc of a life. Most people, in most dimensions, eventually find a more settled rhythm than the intense, forward-moving drive of their most active years. Most people find a level of life that is sustainable over the long term, rather than the consuming and demanding pace of constant adventure. Intelligence, too, differs between Rick variants, though this is a more complicated difference to trace than it might initially seem. All Ricks are, by the standards of their home dimensions, extraordinarily intelligent. That is one of the defining characteristics of the character. But the range of what extraordinarily intelligent means across infinite dimensions is itself very wide. A Rick who is the most intelligent person in a dimension with a generally lower baseline of scientific development might be, by absolute measure, less capable than the main Rick. A Rick from a dimension with a higher baseline might be more capable. The show does not dwell on rankings of Rick intelligence very explicitly, but it does suggest that there are differences. Some Ricks are clearly more capable than others. Some are shown to be more effective at solving problems, more quickly and with more precision. Others are shown to struggle with things that the main Rick handles easily. Doofus Rick, in the other Rick's assessment, is less intelligent than most Ricks. The other Ricks treat his lower intelligence as the primary explanation for everything else about him that they find wanting. But the show, as we have discussed, complicates this assessment by showing us that his gentleness and warmth are not the products of low intelligence, but of a different kind of orientation toward the world. Values represent another important axis of difference. Different Ricks seem to hold different things as important, different things as worth caring about, different things as the measure of a life well lived. The main Rick, whatever his many difficulties and contradictions, ultimately values connection. He values his relationship with Morty. He values, though he often cannot say it directly, his family. He values the experience of genuinely knowing and being known by another person, even as he also fears and avoids it. Other Ricks seem to value different things. The Ricks who rise to political power on the Citadel seem to value power, or at least the ability to shape the world according to their vision. The Ricks who work in service roles seem to have found value in the ordinary satisfaction of a job done reliably. The Ricks who have settled into quiet lives on the Citadel may have found value in stability, in belonging, in the uncomplicated daily rhythm of a community. None of these value systems is inherently wrong. The show does not rank them. It presents them as the natural outcomes of different lives, different experiences, different processes of arriving at an understanding of what matters. Let us also talk about the difference in how various Ricks relate to other people, to community, to the experience of being part of a larger social world. The main Rick has a complicated relationship with community. He is capable of deep and genuine connection with individuals, particularly Morty and, when she is present, his daughter Beth. But he tends to hold larger social structures at a distance. He is suspicious of institutions. He resists authority. He does not easily find himself comfortable in crowds or in situations where the expectation is that he will simply be one of many. Other Ricks have found different ways of being in relation to community. The Ricks who have embedded themselves in the Citadel, who have built lives there and found social groups and engaged with the political life of the place, they have done something that the main Rick has largely not done. They have let themselves belong, in some sense, to something larger than themselves. Whether this represents a wisdom or a surrender is, again, not something the show answers definitively. It is a difference in orientation, a different way of balancing the desire for individual freedom against the human need for belonging. The relationship different Ricks have with their Mortys also varies considerably. This is visible across the episodes we have discussed, and it reflects the broader range of how different Ricks have oriented themselves toward the people in their lives. The main Rick's relationship with his Morty is the primary relationship of the series, and it is a rich and complicated one. There is genuine love there, and genuine care, but there is also a power differential, an information differential, and a history of the main Rick putting Morty in danger, using him as a tool or a shield at times, and not always fully reckoning with the cost of that. Doofus Rick's relationship with his Morty, as briefly shown, is warmer and more straightforward, less complicated by power games or deflection or the need to maintain a certain image. The police Rick in the Ricklantis mix-up has an interesting relationship with the Morty who is his partner, one that starts in a place of tension and moves towards something more like mutual respect over the course of the episode. These variations in how Ricks relate to their Mortys are, in microcosm, reflections of all the larger differences we have been discussing. How open a Rick is, what he values, how he relates to others, how much he is willing to let himself be genuinely present with another person. All of these things show up in how he treats the Morty in his life. There is one more difference worth noting, and it is perhaps the most fundamental of all. Different Ricks seem to have different relationships with their own pain, different ways of holding the difficult things that life has brought them. The main Rick carries his pain in a very specific way. He holds it close, very close, and covers it with everything he has. With humor, with contempt, with constant motion, with genius deployed as distraction. The pain is there, deep and real, but it is buried under so many layers that it rarely gets to speak directly. Other Ricks hold their pain differently. Simple Rick let his joy speak louder than his pain, at least in the memory that the episode focuses on. Doofus Rick seems to hold whatever pain he carries more lightly, without the same crushing weight of self-protection. Toxic Rick is, in a sense, nothing but pain, isolated from everything else. These different relationships with pain are, perhaps, the deepest explanation for all the other differences between Rick variants. The way a person relates to their own suffering determines, in very large measure, how they show up in the world, how open or closed they are, how warm or cold, how driven or settled, how connected or isolated. The Ricks of the multiverse have all suffered in one way or another. That is part of what it means to be Rick. But what they have done with that suffering, how they have chosen to carry it or run from it or transform it, has made them into very different people. As we close this section, let us hold these differences lightly, not as a ranking, not as a hierarchy, but simply as a map. A map of the many ways that the same essential person can be when the multiverse's infinite variations are taken into account. Every Rick you have met in this narration is real. In the world of the show, every one of them is valid. Every one of them is a genuine expression of what Rick Sanchez can be. Some of them are easier to love. Some are harder to look at. Some are heartbreaking. Some are quietly admirable. Some are simply ordinary, in a way that is beautiful in its own right. All of them are Rick, and all of them are showing us something about what it means to be a person in a world that is endlessly more complicated than any of us fully understand. Rest in that. Let it be a gentle thing, not a weighty one. The multiverse is vast, and there is room in it for all of them. And for you too, exactly as you are. Section 9. The nature of infinite Ricks. You are still here, and the night is still with you. Let yourself breathe one slow breath in and one slow breath out. Everything is quiet. Everything is fine. In this section, we are going to move towards something more contemplative. We are going to sit with the concept itself, the idea of infinite Ricks, and think about what it means. Not philosophically, in the sense of grand claims or deep theories, but quietly, in the sense of simply turning the idea over, looking at it from different angles, letting it settle. Because the multiverse of Rick and Morty is not just a plot device. It is not just a mechanism for getting characters into interesting situations. It is an idea that the show takes seriously and that has real consequences for how the characters understand themselves and each other. And the nature of infinite Ricks, specifically, is something that the show returns to again and again with genuine curiosity. The basic idea is simple enough to state. In an infinite multiverse, every possible variation of Rick Sanchez that can exist does exist. Every version of him that could have been somewhere is. Every choice that he could have made but did not, in some dimension, was made. Every path that he did not take, in some dimension, was taken. This means that there is no single Rick Sanchez. There is no canonical Rick, no real Rick, no Rick who is more genuinely Rick than all the others. All of them are equally real. All of them are equally valid. All of them are equally, genuinely, completely Rick. And yet, they are all different. And yet, each one is, in his own dimension, the only Rick, the only version of himself that exists from his own perspective, the only one who is real from the inside. This creates an interesting paradox that the show is very aware of. The main Rick from the inside is the Rick. He is the one who has his experiences, his memories, his relationships, his particular life. He is not one Rick among many from his own perspective. He is simply Rick. But the show keeps reminding him and us that from the outside, from the perspective of the multiverse itself, he is one among an effectively infinite number. He is a point on a vast, branching structure. He is one expression of a character who has been expressed in countless other ways. How do you hold both of these things at the same time? How do you live as if your life is real and specific and particular, which it is, while also knowing that there are infinite versions of it running alongside it, all equally real? The show does not offer a clean resolution to this tension. It is one of the things the show is genuinely interested in, one of the places where it is sitting with a real and difficult question rather than providing an easy answer. What the show does tell us, through its episodes and its characters, is how different Ricks have responded to this awareness. Some Ricks seem to have responded with a kind of nihilism, a sense that if infinite versions of everything exist, then nothing matters, because whatever choice you make, another version of you makes a different choice somewhere. Whatever you build, it has already been built. Whatever you lose, it still exists in another dimension. The logic of infinite variation, taken to its extreme, can seem to undermine the significance of any particular thing. The main Rick occasionally touches this kind of nihilism. It is visible in some of his behavior, in the way he sometimes seems to treat the events of his own life as less important than they might otherwise seem. But it is not the whole of him. There is also, running alongside the nihilism, a genuine and deep care, a belief expressed through action rather than words that things do matter, that the specific people in his specific life are real and worth caring about, regardless of what might be happening in other dimensions. Other Ricks seem to have responded to the awareness of the multiverse with something more like acceptance, a quieter recognition that the infinite variations are simply the nature of things, without needing to draw large conclusions from that. These are the Ricks who have settled into their lives on the Citadel, who have found their routines and their communities and their comfortable equilibria. They know the multiverse is infinite. They know there are other Ricks, and they have decided, more or less consciously, to simply live their particular version of Rick's life without spending too much energy on the implications. This is not intellectually dishonest. It is, in many ways, the most practical response to an overwhelming fact. You cannot actually live in infinite dimensions simultaneously. You can only live in one. And so you live in the one you are in, as fully and as genuinely as you can, and you let the others be what they are. The Citadel itself is, in a way, a collective response to the fact of infinite Ricks. It is what happens when many Ricks decide that the awareness of their shared multiplicity is not a reason for nihilism or for isolation, but for community. It is an attempt to build something together, to find a kind of solidarity in the shared strangeness of being one of infinite versions of the same person. That is, when you think about it, quite a remarkable thing. The Ricks of the Citadel have done something that the main Rick has often resisted. They have found community in their shared nature rather than fleeing from it. They have said, in effect, yes, there are infinite of us, and here we are, together, making something out of that fact. The result is imperfect, as human communities always are. The Citadel has hierarchies and inequalities and political corruption and all the things that human societies develop when they have been around long enough. But it is also a community. It is a real and functioning place where real and functioning lives are being lived. There is also something to be said about what the infinite multiverse of Ricks means for the concept of uniqueness. In most contexts, uniqueness is considered a virtue, being the only one, being irreplaceable, being the one version of yourself that exists. For Ricks, uniqueness in that sense is impossible. There is always another Rick, always another version, always another possibility realized somewhere in the multiverse. Uniqueness, in the traditional sense, is not available to them. But the show suggests, through its characters and their choices, that there is another kind of uniqueness that is available. The uniqueness of a specific life, with its specific relationships and specific experiences and specific moments.
Even if another Rick exists somewhere who is very similar, who has made many of the same choices and lived in similar circumstances, he has not had exactly these relationships, has not known exactly these people, has not had exactly these moments. That particularity, that specific texture of a specific life is something that cannot be duplicated even by the multiverse. It can be approximated, but the exact thing, the exact weave of experience and relationship and memory is unique to each Rick in each dimension. This is, perhaps, the most quietly profound thing the show offers through its exploration of infinite Ricks. Not a nihilistic conclusion, but an affirmative one. Not, nothing matters because infinite versions exist, but rather the specific thing, the particular life, the precise texture of exactly these relationships in exactly this dimension that matters. That is real. And the multiverse, for all its infinite breadth, cannot make that particular thing redundant. It can only produce variations on it. And variations, however close, are not the thing itself. The main Rick's relationship with Morty is not made less real by the fact that in other dimensions, other Ricks have similar relationships with other Mortys. It is not less genuine, less specific, less itself. It is exactly what it is in exactly this dimension between exactly these two people. And that exact thing is, and remains, unique. The show also uses the infinite multiverse to ask a question about determinism and choice. If there are infinite universes, and in each universe a version of Rick makes every possible choice, then is any individual Rick actually choosing anything? Or is every choice already made somewhere by some version of him? This is a genuine philosophical question, and the show is aware of it, but it does not resolve it cleanly because it cannot. Instead, it shows us characters who are making choices and who experience those choices as real and as mattering. Whatever the metaphysics of the multiverse might imply about the ultimate nature of choice, the characters live as if they are choosing. They act as if what they decide matters. They feel the weight of consequences, and they carry that weight. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps the experience of choosing, the felt sense of decision and consequence and responsibility, is what makes something a real choice, regardless of what is happening in other dimensions. Perhaps the metaphysics do not, in the end, reach all the way down to the individual life being lived. What we can say, based on what the show actually shows us, is this: the infinite Ricks of the multiverse are not identical. They are not simply copies of a single template playing out predetermined programs.
They are distinct people, shaped by their specific circumstances, making specific choices, living specific lives. The fact that other Ricks exist, in other dimensions, does not make any individual Rick less real or less specific. The differences between them, which we have been exploring throughout this narration, are genuine differences, not just surface variations, but real distinctions in personality, in value, in emotional life, in how they relate to others and to the world. These differences have been produced by the infinite variability of the multiverse, by the fact that slightly different circumstances, slightly different choices, slightly different histories can produce quite different people, even when those people share a name and a face and a basic nature. And each of those different people is worth knowing. Each of them is worth the few moments it takes to look at them carefully, to understand what makes them particular, to appreciate what they show us about the range of what is possible. The nature of infinite Ricks, then, is not a threat to the significance of any particular Rick. It is, instead, a kind of celebration of the range of what can be. It is the multiverse saying, look at all the things this one figure can become. Look at all the ways this one character can be expressed. Look at all the lives that are possible. And within that celebration, the sad Ricks, and the happy Ricks, and the struggling Ricks, and the settled Ricks, and the driven Ricks, and the gentle Ricks, all of them have a place. All of them are part of the picture. All of them are the multiverse, showing us something real and true. Let that image fill the quiet of the night around you. The infinite Ricks, each in their own dimension, each going about their own particular version of a life. Some of them resting, as you are resting now. Some of them dreaming. Some of them, perhaps, simply breathing slowly in the dark, letting the world hold them for a little while. We are almost at the end of our journey through their world. The final section waits ahead of us, gentle and unhurried. Section 10, Final Reflection. You have come a long way through the night, and here, at last, is the final section, the closing chapter, the quiet place where all the threads of the narration gather together and rest. Let yourself be completely comfortable now. Whatever position you have settled into, whatever weight your body has found, let it be exactly right. There is nothing more to do but breathe and listen and let the words wash over you like the very last light before sleep. We have spent a long time this evening with the Ricks of the multiverse. We have moved slowly through their world, looking carefully at the ones the show has chosen to show us, sitting with their stories and their details and the things they reveal about what it means to be a version of Rick Sanchez in an infinite universe. Let us take a quiet moment now to hold all of them together, not to rank them or analyze them or draw large conclusions from them, simply to remember them gently as you would remember the details of a good dream. Doofus Rick, gentle and kind, in a world that did not fully appreciate his gentleness, moving through the Citadel with a warmth that other Ricks found puzzling and unworthy of respect, but that, when you look at it directly, is one of the most genuinely admirable things in the whole picture. He did not need to be sharp or superior. He did not need to prove his intelligence or his capability. He simply was who he was, warm and real and present. And he treated the Morty in his life with a kindness that the main Rick, for all his love, sometimes struggles to show so direct. Doofus Rick is a reminder that the ways we choose to measure worth, the standards we use to decide who is valuable and who is not, are not the only possible ways. They are choices made by a particular kind of society with particular kinds of values. And other choices are possible. Other measurements are available. The gentle and the kind have worth that the sharp and the superior cannot always see. Simple Rick, in his moment of happiness, completely and genuinely present to the joy of watching his daughter grow. His happiness so real, so clean, so uncomplicated, that it became the raw material for a commercial enterprise that could only approximate it, never replicate it. He found the simple thing, the thing that all the complexity of genius and adventure and interdimensional travel cannot manufacture, that can only be stumbled into when a person is present enough and open enough and willing enough to let an ordinary moment be extraordinary. His situation, the machine, the facility, the harvesting of his joy is not comfortable to think about, but the joy itself, the memory at the center of it, that is something real and beautiful. That is Simple Rick's gift to the story, a picture of happiness so genuine that even a corporation recognized it as valuable. Even a for-profit enterprise knew it was the real thing.
Toxic Rick, stripped of everything except the painful parts of the main Rick's psychology, moving through the world as raw wound without the moderating presence of the whole. Dark and difficult to look at, and yet, in his own way, honest. More directly honest, perhaps, than the version of Rick who has learned to cover his pain with genius and humor and motion. He showed us what lies beneath. He showed us the cost of the life the main Rick has lived, the losses and the fears and the grief that have been carried decade after decade, buried under layers of performance and protection. And by showing us those things directly, he made it possible to understand the whole Rick more fully, to see the pain and the genius and the love and the cruelty all as parts of the same complicated person, all as things that belong together, that make sense together, that cannot be separated without losing the wholeness of the character. The Rick with the afro, present in the background of 2 important episodes, standing quietly as evidence that the multiverse is genuinely infinite, that Rick Sanchez can look like many things, that no single appearance is the template, and no single history is the only history, that the character is larger than any one physical form, and that the multiverse knows this, even if we sometimes forget. He did not need a spotlight. His presence in the crowd was enough. It was the multiverse, showing its work, demonstrating its breadth, making visible the fact that diversity is not an exception to its rules, but an expression of them. The background Ricks of the Citadel, each one going about their ordinary life in the extraordinary context of a city built by geniuses. The vendors and the workers and the police and the politicians and the social groups standing in the street, all of them filling the world of the Citadel with the texture of real life. They are not adventurers. They are not the stars of their own stories, at least not in the way the show presents them. They are simply people, living in a world that is genuinely strange, and yet in which they have found something like ordinary routine, something like daily life, something like home. And that is not a small thing. Finding home, finding routine, finding the ordinary rhythm of a life within the extraordinary context of the multiverse, that requires a kind of courage, or a kind of wisdom, or a kind of acceptance that is easy to underestimate. The Citadel itself, that remarkable and imperfect city, built by Ricks who decided that the fact of their shared multiplicity was not a reason for isolation, but for community, who built something together, even knowing that building anything together is hard, and that communities are always imperfect, always subject to the same failures and inequalities and corruptions that human communities everywhere are subject to. They built it anyway, and it exists in the world of the show as a real place where real lives are lived, where Ricks of all kinds have found their way, where Mortys navigate their complicated position, where political contests are played out and factory shifts are worked, and ordinary days accumulate into something that might, from the outside, look like history. The multiverse that contains all of this, infinite and vast and beyond the full comprehension of anyone within it, even the most brilliant Rick. The multiverse that holds all the possible Ricks, all the possible Mortys, all the possible outcomes and choices and lives, holds them all simultaneously, without preference, without judgment, without deciding that any one of them is more real or more valid than any other. All of them equally real, all of them equally there, all of them showing us, from a different angle, the same essential truth, that a person is not a fixed thing. A person is a range of possibilities, many of them realized in different dimensions, each one shaped by the specific circumstances that produced it, each one genuinely and completely itself. What does all of this mean in the end? What does the show want us to take away from the many Ricks it has shown us? It does not, perhaps, want us to take away a lesson in the traditional sense. It does not want to hand us a moral, a take-home message, a simple conclusion. It is a more restless and more honest kind of storytelling than that. But if there is something in the picture, something that settles into you after all the looking and all the listening, it might be something like this. People are complex and varied and shaped by things they did not choose,
and they contain more possibilities than any one life can realize. The range of what a person can be is wider than what they have become.
And the multiverse, in its own extravagant way, shows us that range, shows us all the Ricks who could have been, who are, in other dimensions, exactly what they could have been. And within that vast range, each particular Rick, in each particular dimension, is exactly what they are, specific and real and unrepeatable in the precise texture of their specific life. There is something quietly comforting in this, if you let it be. Not the infinite range of possibilities, which can feel vertiginous if you look at it directly for too long, but the particularity, the specificity of exactly this life, exactly these relationships, exactly these moments. The fact that, however many versions of any person exist in the multiverse, none of them are exactly you. None of them have exactly your life, your relationships, your moments, your particular way of moving through the world. That is yours. It cannot be taken away by the infinite. It is, in its smallness and its particularity, completely and uniquely real. Let us close now with the image of the multiverse at rest. All those infinite dimensions running alongside each other, each one complete, each one whole, each one full of lives being lived. In one of them, Doofus Rick is probably having a quiet evening, being kind to someone, or simply sitting in the comfortable silence of a day that went well enough, not worrying about whether he meets the standards of the other Ricks, simply being himself, which is, as it turns out, more than enough. In another, Simple Rick is in his machine, deep in the memory that the facility uses, but that belongs, fundamentally, to him. Somewhere in that memory, his daughter is young, and the day is good, and he is completely happy, in the simple and total way that only ever comes from the simplest things. In another, somewhere in the Citadel, a factory Rick is finishing his shift. The work is done for the day. He is heading home through the streets of the city, passing other Ricks going other places, all of them ordinary and particular and completely real within the world they have built together. And in another, the Rick with the afro is somewhere in his own dimension, being exactly who he is, a genius, a grandfather, a scientist, shaped by a different history than the main Rick, but carrying the same essential nature, living his own particular version of a remarkable life. All of them are there, in the multiverse. All of them are real. And the show, in giving us glimpses of them, in taking the time to look at them carefully and with genuine interest, is doing something simple and important. It is saying, look at all the ways a person can be. Look at all the lives that are possible. Look at the range of what this one character, this one name, this one essential nature can become when the infinite variations of existence are given room to run. It is a generous thing to look that carefully, to give that kind of attention to the minor, the background, the forgotten, the Ricks who are not the star of their own episode, the Ricks who appear for a moment in a crowd scene and then are gone, the Ricks whose stories are implied rather than told, whose lives we can only guess at from the details we are given. They deserve that attention. All of them do. And now, as the narration draws to its close, let us let all of them rest. Let the Ricks of the multiverse go about their business, in their infinite dimensions, living their infinite lives. Let the Citadel settle into its ordinary evening, with its ordinary streets and its ordinary people doing ordinary things. Let the multiverse be vast and quiet around you, the way the universe is vast and quiet when you look up at the night sky. All that space, all that distance, all those possibilities, realized and unrealized, real and theoretical, present and potential. And you, here, in this particular moment, in this particular body, in this particular room, in this particular dimension, breathing slowly, eyes closed or almost closed. The night settled fully around you like something warm and complete. You have been through a long journey tonight, through the foundations of the multiverse, through Doofus Rick's gentleness, through Simple Rick's happiness, through Toxic Rick's honesty, through the Citadel's complex world, through the quiet details of the background and the minor, through the differences and similarities and the nature of infinite variation. You have held all of it, lightly and gently, the way you hold the details of a good dream. Let it all settle now. Let the words slow down and soften,
and become part of the quiet. There is nothing more to think about, nothing more to understand. Simply the night and your breath and the gentle presence of the world around you. The multiverse is infinite. The Ricks are countless. And somewhere in all those infinite dimensions, right now, some version of everything is happening. But you are here in this one particular, completely real dimension. And that is exactly enough. Sleep well.